Hi, welcome to Next Level Carpentry. I'm Matt Jackson and I'm in the shop tonight working to denail this pallet wood. I went out today shooting a video called In Search of the Perfect Pallet. I found this wood in an industrial park. I chucked it in the back of the truck and brought it home. So tonight I'm disassembling and denailing this so that I can clean it up and see what I actually got in this haul. I mentioned in the other video that my intent is to use wood from pallets to build a new door for the new shop. When I built this dividing wall, I actually just hung a piece of industrial strength cardboard here as a temporary dust partition between this and the other side of the garage. And I determined to build a new frame and panel door for this opening with pallet wood. And part of that process is to clean up the lumber. I need to disassemble it, pull the nails, clean up the ends, plane it off, kind of see what I got so I can determine what parts of this pallet end up being what parts of that door. For the process, I have an assortment of tools, WMD I call them, weapons of mass destruction or weapons of mass demolition or possibly weapons of mass disassembly. I have this pile here. I threw a clamp in just to stabilize pieces if I need it. I've got a couple hammers. I've got a pair of channel lock pinchers that are capable of cutting a pallet nail with very little effort and shooting them dangerously off into the distance. I've got a slide hammer nail puller for stubborn nails. If they get buried down in the wood and I need to get them out, I've got that slide hammer nail puller. If you haven't seen the video of how to use that, you'll see it working here probably on some of this, but that video goes into detail about the finer points of using that cool tool. I have two hammers here. They're both 22-ounce S-swing hammers, and I have a waffle-head, which is this one with the serrated tip, and I guess this one would be a pancake head. It's just smooth. I have two of them here mostly for a comparison to show you what I see as the benefits and differences of these two. When I'm denailing wood, I like to use the waffle-head hammer. And the reason why is with the pancake head or the smooth face, when I'm pounding these nails, if I don't really aim carefully, the tip of the nail tends to slide off the face of the hammer. So I prefer a waffle head where when I'm driving the nails out, the point of the nail actually sticks in between those waffles and it helps guide the nail better with a better chance of driving it out of the wood. So that's the WMD. I've got a little OCD thing that I do, and I actually sharpen the head of a waffle head hammer. Let's go to the bench and I'll show you how you can quickly sharpen the face of one of these if yours has gotten dull from pounding on steel or concrete or rocks or just years of driving nails. All right, to sharpen the face of a waffle head hammer, simply clamp it in a vise of some sort to get it stable enough to work on. I've got this Metabo WEV 10-125 5-inch grinder with a 40 thousandths cutoff wheel disc in it. I really like the guard on the Metabo. It's stable, but a quick pull of this little lever here allows me to rotate the guide to whatever position I like it. I'm kind of putting it in race car mode here so I can drive it like this. I've plugged the grinder in, put earplugs in, and then basically I'm just going to retrace these waffle lines with that thin grinding wheel to deepen them up a little bit. Naturally, I'm going to go both directions. There's an extra lot of grip on that face right now. It's been a while since I sharpened it, but now it'll really grab those nail points when I go to drive the nails out. And even if I wasn't taking pallets apart, I like to tune that face up once in a while when framing for the original purpose of that waffle head, which is to steer the heads of nails to put English on them when they're being driven in general carpentry work. Well, now that I've got the WMD all set to go, it's time to knock these things apart. First thing I want to do for this sort of work is to have a nice sturdy set of sawhorses to work on. These are more than adequate to do the job. If you've seen the how to build these super strong sawhorse videos, you'll realize just how much more than this little pile of lumber these horses can take. You can follow a link at the end of the video to see how to build those if you need a sturdy set of sawhorses to work on. I'm just going to start knocking this stuff apart and take it as it comes. If I go handheld here, you can see what I got in this pallet wood. This is cherry. I believe this is ash. There's maybe a couple pieces of ash. This looks like a piece of oak, more cherry. Probably ash, cherry. This piece here is ash for sure. One of these pieces look like elm. This one here looks kind of like elm. If you look at this piece right here, that's cherry, and it's a crotch piece where the bend in the tree puts that beautiful grain. I can't wait to see what this piece cleans up like when this is done and put it in an attractive spot in that door. And my motto is that all's fair in love, war, and demolition. So we'll just see what it takes to get this stuff taken apart here. That's not too bad. It's a nice piece of oak nailed to a piece of cherry. This is, oh boy, I don't know what this stuff is. Looks like elm, and I don't know what this one is. And they might end up being nothing more than firewood when it's done, but we'll give them a chance at a new life and a new door. This is actually the piece I'm most excited about, that piece of curly cherry. And if you don't know it, the thing about pallet nails is they're primarily made for going in, not coming out. They're long, skinny, they've got a twisted shank, they're generally rusted when it comes time to pull something apart. So a regular nail puller generally doesn't get the job done very well. The nails are shiny and smooth when they're shot in, so they go right into this hardwood. Hardwood's probably wet when the pallet is made, and that makes them all the more difficult to get out. So I think I've got this stuff pulled apart well enough. Basically just a little bit of brutal leverage with a hammer. I get a pry bar out if necessary. This stuff was all pretty cooperative with just a claw hammer. Next is to drive the nails out, and I always hope that I can drive them out the first time, but that doesn't always happen. They're long, they're skinny, they don't have a lot of compression strength. They're made for tensile strength, which keeps them from pulling apart. But we'll just see. In that case, I lucked out. There again, that waffle head hammer really steers that nail tip. I'm doing my best to drive them out in the direction they were driven. If I can detect there was an angle, I try to drive it out the same way. When I go to pull nails, if they'll cooperate, you just pull them with a claw hammer. This is why I prefer a straight claw hammer instead of a goat's head with the real hook on the claw. This way I can use that claw kind of like a chisel or a pry bar. Wedge it in there. We'll see how long our luck holds with this. And if you've tried to take apart pallets, you realize that I am lottery lucky here getting this many nails to drive out without extra measures. There's a bent one, I wanted it to do that. Another bent one. First trick I'll use when driving a nail causes it to bend is to just use the hook of the hammer and straighten it at the bend. Give it a second chance to be driven straight out. That one worked. This one's a little longer. It's got a couple bends in it. It's just going to bend again. So plan B when it comes down to that is the snippers. I just nipped the nail off at a straight section close to the wood. Caution for those flying nail ends. And now I have a nice, straight, sturdy little stub of nail to get this nail to start moving out. And I can drive this straight out. And because that nail is shorter, it's easier for the compression strength of when I'm hammering it to actually break the rust loose and push the head out. That pulls out fine. Still pretty lucky here. By using a bouncing action of the hammer, I can get pretty stubborn nails to pull out rather than just trying with pulling force alone. These nails are all being pretty cooperative, so I'll just show what I do when they're not quite so cooperative. If I get on here and I can't get that nail to budge with just a hammer, I always want to use a lever. It's nice to have two hammers. And just use this as a fulcrum and multiply the leverage of pulling that nail out. And with that kind of leverage applied, I can easily get enough pulling force to snap the nail in two, if that's what it comes down to. Hopefully that doesn't happen here too much. A stubborn nail and a cooperative one. Again, I'm just straightening this flimsy nail with the claw hammer. Claw. Give it a second chance to be driven out. Let's see if this oak will be a little less cooperative for pulling nails. Yeah, there's a good bender. Those ones there. I threw a nice thick piece of oak. These nails almost seem a little skinnier than those, so we'll snip these off. Again, being mindful of where that flying piece of nail is going. Or where it's not going is more the case. These are very deliberate, straight down whacks on that nail to discourage it from kinking on that short little stub. And it got those to move quite nicely. Here again, we're just snipping and driving. This one is really stubborn, but I got it to move with a little bit of patience. Anytime they're tougher than I care about to pull, just use a little bit of leverage. With a fulcrum of one sort or another, I can start out with just the thickness of the handle and work my way up to a thicker and thicker fulcrum and get those nails out of there without too much of a fight. Well, I'm going to keep working on this stuff. Mostly what's going on is routine. I want to find a nail that puts up a fight to the point I need to use the slide hammer nail puller to get it out, to show that. All right, I'm working through this denailing process, and I've got a nail that misbehaved about to the point where I need it to. I'm going to conjure this up a little bit to show where that slide hammer nail puller comes in. One of these two nails came out just fine. I'll pull that out the regular way. But this other one, there's barely enough of a head on there, and I could really try to jam this claw hammer onto that head, but a simpler way is to use the slide hammer nail puller with these pinching jaws that have an incredible amount of pinching force. It's going to zoom right in there, and if this nail had been loosened by driving it from the other side and the head either broke off or was still beneath the surface of the wood, I wouldn't be able to get it with a claw hammer like I could this time. So I just used the slide hammer nail puller, put it around that head, give it a whack, and then pull. I'll see if I can find another one in this pile of wood before I get done for a little better example of how that works. Actually, let's just do it right here. This nail, there's a head on there that I could grab with a claw hammer. Sometimes the head of the nail will break off in the process, so let's just pretend that happened by snipping it off. So now we have a headless nail with little chance of pulling with a claw hammer. So just for video demonstration purposes, I'm going to clamp this other end of the board to the sawhorse. And this is one of the reasons why in the sawhorse video I have the legs of the horses in from the end of the wood, because I like to have this end of the I-beam exposed so that I can easily get a clamp on it for situations just like this. With that end firmly clamped down and essentially two headless nails in this wood, put out the slide hammer nail puller, drive it in next to that nail, and give it a pull. Out it comes, just like that. To further emphasize the point, I'll cut that nail off flush and show how these pincher jaws will dig in and grab that nail. Those first few attempts didn't work because the jaws were pinching wood against the nail, and the wood makes it slippery. Once I've got it to the point where it's just pinching jaws against steel, it grabs it and pulls it out. You can see the marks on here where those pinching jaws grab the nail. And in the big picture, those two nails were relatively easy to pull. This tool has the capability of pulling nails that are much, much more difficult to get out. Again, there's a video dedicated solely to the use of this slide hammer nail puller. If you decide you need one and you can't find one locally, there's a link to the Crescent version of this tool on the Amazon influencers page for Next Level Carpentry, where you can pick one up. Well, if we just stand back and let Chip work, he can get the rest of those boards cleaned up nicely so that this lumber is all to the point that it needs to be, so that it can be cut to approximate length depending on what part of the door it's going to be used in. Be able to plane a surface and clean things up to see how the different wood grains are going to go together to make that door. I'll work a little bit on the design of the door, which I haven't yet, not knowing what I was going to have for wood to work with. And Chip can use all of the tricks in that bag of tricks for getting the rest of the nails out of the wood. Snipping nails, driving them, pulling them, using a leverage, using the slide hammer nail pull if necessary. And these de-nailing methods can be used on any pallet work. On this particular pallet, it's easier because they're bigger pieces of wood, they're more sturdy, and there's fewer nails overall because there's not so many pieces. Did you see that? That's the only segue I could find to go from that segment to this one. Segue, get it? Whatever. All right, as promised, I want to do a tour of the stacking toolboxes. These are the toolboxes I keep my WMD in. It was seen in the Searching for the Perfect Pallets video. There was a few comments asking about these, so I thought, hey, I'll just throw in a tour of this stack of toolboxes at the end of this video. So these are pretty sweet. They stack up. Each one has its own handle. and the handle for any one of them interlocks with the toolbox below it. That's very handy. The reason I have my tools set up like this is because I used to use a single toolbox like this. When I was working for a contractor, I could get chisels, short tools, long tools, pretty much everything I needed for a day of framing, residential framing, into this box. As time went on, I couldn't get everything in there, plus it started getting too heavy. And then when I went out on my own and had to have more of my own tools, this was just not adequate anymore. I wanted a way that I could sort out the tools, bring certain ones if I didn't need them all, but I wanted them to all stay together so that they'd be available if I needed them. Plus, because these are individuals, the weight is divided by 4, which is quite manageable. So that's what these guys are. I've got them organized and categorized. I've got some goofy names here: drillers, markers, sweepers, hammers, pinchers, and priors. Just rough category names on the boxes as somewhat of a guideline to help me know which toolbox I need to dig out for a given job. And so I'll just go through these layer by layer for a rough idea of the general tools that I take on a remodeling project for the demolition and tear out phase. I'm actually into the framing phase before I start bringing more other tools, but most of the other tools end up being air tools and larger power tools if they don't fit in these boxes. I do have the other toolbox with the slide out drawer. That's basically my finishing carpentry, installation, trim carpentry toolbox, but this is the WMD framing demolition toolbox setup. In this top box has the drillers on this side and markers and measurers on this side. I think you can see this okay. I don't have enough trays to categorize this all individually, but I've got a selection of driver bits here, which are helpful. Those are kind of drillers, and spade bits, which don't stay in the tool caddy very well, but these ones are nice and cut a decent hole with these little extra cutting wings on here. They're not so expensive that I worry about trashing them when drilling into nails. I've got staples and a hammer tackler in here. They have nothing to do with drilling, but they fit. And this little gizmo is for rolling heavy sheets in tight places. Comes in handy once in a while when moving sheetrock around on a job site. On the markers side, obviously I've got extra tape measures and a 100-footer for layout tasks, a string line for straightening walls, forms, etc., lumber crayon, and a Sharpie marker, which is probably no good. Then red and blue chalk lines, stair gauges for a framing square for marking, red and blue replacement chalk for the chalk lines, and a pair of Mason's lines blocks for pulling a string on stuff at some time. The way I have these stacked now, the second layer I call sweepers and cutters. Again, just general categories: whisk broom, dust broom for cleaning up. I have a sheetrock carrying handle and a sheetrock lifting jack for hanging sheetrock. On this side is all the cutters. There's this CRL long-handled knife with this wicked blade on here. Things are fantastic for demolition and tear out. I made this special little blade protector and did a video on it, which I'm going to attach after this segment in this video for making one of those. It's got a magnet in it. There's a little slot in there for the blade and a magnet inside. Keeps it from falling off. You can check that video out if you're interested. Sheetrock planes, jab saw, wide putty knife, extra knife, blades. I have extra of those really long knife blades too, which are super handy. You can see those things in use in the surgical removal of sheetrock video. I've got another shorter long knife cutting tool here. This is a regular utility knife blade, but in this rigid handle, which comes in handy. Got a pair of snips. These are pretty heavy-duty aviation snips. I've got a Stanley 199 with a fixed blade in the extended position for sheetrock hanging. And I keep this little diamond knife hone in there for tuning up that blade. In the process, sheetrock takes the sharp edge off a blade pretty quick, but with this little diamond honing tool, I can keep that blade sharp and performing for quite some time on a sheetrock job. There's a spare utility knife. Actually has a sharp blade in it. And something that everybody needs is a chisel. You've heard of a sawzall? Well, this is a chisel. I use this thing to bust through anything, nails, concrete, everything that ruins a good chisel. That's what the chisel is for. And down in the bottom, I've got a file for sharpening putty knives. As I said, if you're interested in seeing how I made this sheath for protecting that exposed knife blade, check out the little video at the end of this one. Moving to the next layer, we get into the first layer of WMD, and this whole toolbox here is labeled hammers, and I have the two 22-ounce S-wings, the waffle and the pancake. Here's Thor and Thor's little brother. I don't know what his name is. They stack in here somehow. Here's an old, very experienced trim hammer, a sheetrock hammer from back in the day. I don't use that much, but I also sharpen the head of this sheetrock hammer the same way as the S-wing to keep it nice and grippy for driving sheetrock nails, which I don't do much anymore. And down in here is a dead blow mallet. That really is nice for cabinet installation or doing metal work when things need to be given a little love tap to line up. And last but not least, layer 4 of the WMD. This is the pullers and the pinchers and priors over here. There's the slide hammer nail puller. And I'll say that I made this toolbox. I want to keep it as small as possible, but I wanted to make sure I could get this tool in here. These other pry bars fit nicely in that length, but I didn't make this extra long to carry a 2-foot level or anything. I figured this was enough, about 18 inches inside. This side I have those channel lock nail pinchers, channel locks, crescent wrench, an assortment of cold chisels. These have all been sharpened. I keep those tuned up on a grinder because they are super effective when they're sharp like that. There's a center punch, a tuck pointing chisel, and a chisel holder for times when my knuckles tell me to use one. There's another tuck pointing chisel, a narrower one. Those are great for all sorts of applications. There's a blade wrench from my old worm drive skill saw, nail set, and actually a cutoff railroad spike. That makes one heck of a driving tool for who knows what kind of situation. So that should pretty well cover the WMD and the stacking toolboxes that I carry them around in. From the bottom layer to the top, I can stack them in any order. And the way the handle's designed, I can carry these 2 at a time to carry the whole batch off somewhere if I need to. And I can also just take 1 or 2 or 3 on a job. If my workload and responsibilities were different, I can imagine having twice as many of these boxes. Further categorize things to keep them better organized. If I need mechanics wrenches, they could be in a drawer. Sheetrock taping tools, clamps. I could have glue and sandpaper in one. All sorts of things like that. But for me, for now, 4 boxes with 8 compartments works great, and it's a lot better than hauling that single toolbox around because these tools are more accessible because they're not stacked so deep. So I guess I'll make that a wrap up, and there goes the segue again into the little sheath making portion of this video before I wrap it up. In the cutter's drawer I have this 13-inch CRL Long-handled knife with these crazy long blades in them. I use those for the surgical removal of sheetrock. And I've been meaning to make a sheath to protect that exposed blade in this tray for some time. So I think I'll do it here and now for this video. I thought this piece of figured spalted crabapple wood would make a nice sheath for that knife. I'll start out by flattening it on the joiner. The next step is a couple passes through the thickness planer to make the faces parallel. And I put pencil lines on there so I know that once the pencil lines are gone, the whole face has been planed. Back to the joiner to square up an edge. And a couple tune-up passes on the widthness planer, get the edges cleaned up. That's kind of a pretty piece of wood for a scrap. And finally, I'll square up the ends of this that were once chainsawed so they're square and easy to work with. Once I've got a nice piece of stock, smooth, square, and straight on all the edges, I'll pick a show face for this little knife holder. I think I'll use this spot here. And I'll lay out the height of the blade on the end of the piece of wood, leaving about a 1/4 inch top and bottom. That looks pretty decent. A couple marks tell me how wide to make the slot for the blade protector. And I want the thickness of the side of this protector to be thick enough to hold a magnet, so I'm going to go about a strong 1/8 of an inch and put the saw curve of the blade right there. And marks on the end of the wood for setting the blade height. And I'll use the mark on the end of the wood to set the thickness of the piece being cut, leaving that good 1/8 of an inch, actually 3/16 of an inch thickness between the saw blade and the fence. It's imperative that the blade be set at 90 degrees. I'm making the cut using one of my push sticks. This one is a 1/4 inch material with a real thin heel on it that'll push through between the blade and the fence. Leaving a nice even thickness of material between the kerf and the face of the piece. Well, wouldn't you know it, I had a fight with my camera right about the time I made this first piece. So I'm going to go through the steps again here. They're pretty simple, and what I want to end up with is a piece like this with a wide rabbet. That's the thickness of the knife's blade. So I remarked the other end of the piece of wood to show the thickness of the side that will hold the magnet, and then this shoulder on the rabbet. So I set the blade to the height of the depth of the cut here, and I set the space between the fence and the blade to equal this thickness, which is about 3/16 of an inch. This is a smooth planed face on the outside. What that cut gave us was this kerf, about a 3/16 inch wall here, and then this lug of wood on the top. I hope that shows up in the camera. The next step is to cut this loose here, so we end up with this shoulder piece, or this side piece with a little shoulder or lug on the side, and this will get cut off at just over the thickness of the blade here. And I can lower the blade because I only have to cut through this much wood. I'll lower the blade, and then I'll move the fence over a skinny 1/16 of an inch. I'll give it a test cut, make any adjustments, and then push it the rest of the way through. I hope you can see what this piece needs to look like when it's done. It's smooth here, parallel on these outsides. On the inside, there's a rabbet. That's the thickness of the blade on the shoulder, and then there's a lug of wood left over. This lug of wood is approximately the dimension I scribed out by laying the knife blade on the end of the piece of wood. This will make sense more in just a minute. So I want the blade keeper to fit the end of the knife. This is a 35-degree angle here. So I'm going to go make that cut on the miter box so that the knife fits snugly to the end of this blade keeper. And I'll mark about the width of the blade on there and drill a hole for this magnet. I've set the depth to keep the tip of the bit from coming out the other side of the wood. It's okay if the magnet sticks out just slightly. And I'll mark the outside of the wood so I remember about where that magnet hole is and don't lose track of it. The simplest way I've found to get magnets to stick in wood is to rough up one side, like so, on a file or with a piece of sandpaper. Spray the back side of the magnet with stick-fast activator. Put a dab of Gorilla Glue super glue in the hole. Then put the roughed up side of the magnet down in the hole and push, giving it 10 seconds to set up. And wipe off the uncured excess with a paper towel. That magnet is now there to stay and will hold our blade keeper to the blade. Next, I'll rough cut this sheet to length so that it can be glued together, keeping in mind where that magnet spot is. For gluing this together, I use stick-fast super glue again. I'm going to shield the face of this lug from the activator and spray some on this edge on both sides. That stick-fast is about done for. Next, I'll put a bead of Gorilla super glue on this lug on both pieces, going far enough to catch the full mating piece. Doesn't have to be too big of a bead on here. So each of these pieces is activated on this edge and glued on this edge. Next, using a 90-degree intersecting surface like a table saw fence, I'll put one piece with the glued lug down, take the other piece with the glued lug up. The table surface helps line these up. The fence allows me to push the pieces tight together for 10 seconds until those two halves are thoroughly bonded together. Voila, it is done. I made a boo-boo here. Didn't get the pieces lined up, but that's okay. I was going to trim it off anyways, and the magnet's far enough in, well, that'll be okay. Back at the miter box, I'll trim this at 35 degrees so that both ends line up and the magnet is still in from the end. Now I lay the knife blade on here approximately where it goes and mark the end just a little bit long, and can see how our magnet is working there. And trim that off too. The knife blade slides into that clean little slot and the magnet holds it in place to protect fingers while digging for tools and toolboxes. I like to do a little tuning up of things like this. I'll use a best block for demanding sanding to round the corners. Sharp putty knife for cleaning up edges from glue and to take off burn marks. And after a little touch up with some smooth sandpaper to smooth things up. Give this little gem a coat of some clear lacquer just because we can.